Thanks for joining us today, Matt. Happy to have you and excited to hear more about the vision for electric vehicles at FPL. Would you mind sharing a bit about that?
Sure, Maria, and it's great to be here at the Bidgley conference. Sorry we can't all be in person. I'm sure we'd all love to get back to that, and we will soon. But we've been busy on electric vehicles here at Florida Power and Light for the last 18 months and kind of laying the groundwork for the future. We've been asking ourselves, what is the role of the utility in the transformation of the transportation sector? And we kind of see it in a few different pieces. The first is public charging infrastructure, right? Obviously, we need charging infrastructure out there for our customers who are buying electric vehicles to feel comfortable that they can get around the state. The second piece is fleets, and that's maybe a little bit behind passenger vehicles and some of the stories that you're seeing out there. Tesla's obviously done a good bit on the passenger side, but on the fleet side, we're seeing a lot of opportunity right now. So what is the role of the utility in enabling fleet transitions, right? Think municipal buses, but also think private commercial fleets down to Ford, F-150 pickup trucks and things like that. So we've been spending some time there. And then finally in residential, right? We understand whether it's multi-unit dwelling or single family, a lot of charging is going to happen in the future at your home. And so what is the role for the utility to play there? So in each one of those different areas, we've had a set of initiatives underway for the last 18 months. And with our proposed settlement agreement that is out there right now, we plan to take even bigger steps. And I'm happy to get more into each one of those programs as we progress.
Thanks. That's a great overview. I think I am going to shift more into details really about your strategic initiatives and goals at FPL.
Sure. So let me start with the public charging infrastructure. So we've set out to establish really two different programs, two different pilots to begin gathering data. Up until, let's say, 12 months ago, as big of a utility as FPL is, one of the largest in the country, we had not deployed a charger other than some workplace charging. So we wanted to understand the technology, the resiliency of it, what it takes to run a network like that, what customer preferences are, the app, the interface with the driver as you come up to charge. So the first piece of that public charging initiative was a workplace and destination level 2 program where we deployed over 1,000 chargers across the state of Florida. Those chargers, most of them are in place. By the end of this year, we anticipate all those chargers will be in place. We've taken tens of thousands of sessions from customers that are plugging in and charging those, and we're beginning to gather data and understand a lot more about time of use for those charging stations. The other piece is, of course, the fast charging network that we've looked across the state, picked out the points where we can connect an FPL fast charger using the main corridors of the state every 50 miles. So you can credibly get up and down Florida using our public charging network, or across Florida where not many other providers have gone. So we've kind of, with that initiative, put about 100 fast chargers out there in 18 different locations to build what I would say is kind of the initial skeleton of that network. Remember, Tesla has a network out there today, but that network is just for Tesla vehicles at the moment. So we see ourselves as providing the public charging network for any vehicles that may be on the road.
That's fantastic. Do you think that providing that public charging network, making this visible now, will lead to growth in EVs because consumers are seeing that on the road?
I do. It's a little bit of chicken and the egg, right? Cars ranges are getting longer, right? So, if you really look at the trips you take, you can probably get around to most destinations without having it. However, somebody who's buying an EV wants to know that if they need to make a drive, we're down in West Palm Beach all the way up to Orlando or even get up to Jacksonville, how do I plot that trip out with this car? And I think, range anxiety continues to be the number one issue for a lot of EV drivers. And I think getting out there with this very public network, talking about what we're doing, is helping the non-Tesla owners, I think, and there'll be more of those coming, get comfortable with being able to move around the state.
That's really great. Could we possibly talk about some of the other really interesting EV projects you have going on? I know that it's more than just the infrastructure updates.
Sure. So with any public charging network, I'll talk about our app first. So one of the things that you've got to figure out if you're going to deploy network is what is the interface? And so depending on which technology and vendor you go with, there may already be an app that's out there, right? So PlugShare is obviously capturing all of the different stations out there, but then I'm talking about the interface too, where the customer coming up, how do they pay for the charge, right? What are they seeing? How do they identify where that's going to be in the system? We've built out an app to help customers navigate to our charging sites. We've tried to pick up some best practices about letting them know if the charging station is down, if it's in use, talking a little bit about the cost of that charging station. And this is really some foundational pieces of the network. You can't just deploy the hardware. You have to have the software to go with that. And that is also bringing all of our chargers are networked, so we're getting data coming back both on sessions, so we can better anticipate, where the areas of higher use are and what the time of day that these stations are getting most utilized. So that app is really key to the experience. It's something that we're promoting. And now with those 1,000+ charging stations out there, this interface, I feel like we finally have kind of the core elements to begin to build off that network and think about how do we evolve it from here.
That's really cool. Moving on to some maybe like community implementations, do you have any vehicle-to-grid pilots or fleet deployments that you've worked with communities on?
Yeah, we've got a couple initiatives under fleets. First is, as you mentioned, the vehicle to grid. So about 2 years ago, we began this process of thinking about the best use cases to try out vehicle to grid. And I think we reached the conclusion that a number of others in the market reach, which is vehicle to grid for school buses. It's a relatively large battery. It's a set route. It's usually parked in the afternoon early enough where it's connected presumably to the grid at the time that we need the energy the most, because our peak is in the early evening, and then shorter routes too, right? So you don't have a battery that's completely drained by the time it gets to the station. So we partner with the city of West Palm Beach. We've got 5 school buses, 2 of which are already here and operating, and they've got vehicle to grid technology integrated into them. Anybody who understands vehicle to grid knows the technology is brand new, so there's a lot of just trying out, making sure that we have the right interfaces, making sure that we're talking to the equipment correctly, and that we're finding a way to do this and not messing with the schedule that the school district needs to move those school buses around. So we're in the early stages now of finally being able to test that, but that is clearly where part, I think, of the fleet experience is going to go, where you're going to have fleet vehicles that are parked with charge available to put into the grid. And as we learn, as the utility who's managing the grid, a little bit more about the energy and how to dispatch those, that's when you start working towards what is the compensation maybe if we needed that energy on a hot summer day. Turns out also school buses are usually not running in the summers, right? They're parked where kids are on summer vacation. So I think there's a lot of interest in finding what is the blueprint for that. I don't know if the school bus blueprint works as well for municipal transit buses, right, or for private commercial fleets, but it's a great use case to start and then also really to try out that vehicle to grid technology.
Definitely. We'll be surely checking in to see how that's going. Moving in more to those future projects, can you share maybe what's on the horizon as far as projects for FPL?
Sure. On the horizon, which is really not looking too far in the future, maybe we're talking later part of 22. We've got a couple other innovative ideas. We'll see how much traction these get long term. One is we want to bring the charging station to you. So we are working on designing effectively a tractor trailer with about 3 megawatt hours of batteries on it, and then 4 to 6 fast chargers that attach to that. That means we can deploy that, that mobile charging station really anywhere on the grid. So think, whether it's in Florida, we have hurricane evacuations at times. You could have grid outages. It could bolster some areas that we see a lot of utilization, but we haven't yet deployed chargers. We're going to learn how to move that around the system where it makes the most sense, and to kind of fill in some of the gaps where it's needed. So that is one thing. And by the way, that's charged from a microgrid. So it can charge from the grid normally. But if the grid was out, we have enough solar and batteries on site that we could charge up that mobile charging station and really move it anywhere, right? So we're really thinking a lot about resilience. So that's one. The other thing is we have a passion for trying to reinvent the gas station. So I talked a little bit earlier about your home. If you're in a single family home, that's where you're going to do most of your charging in the future, likely 80+% of your charging. But if you live in an urban area, multi-unit dwelling is a little bit more complicated if you're in an apartment or a condo. And so there we've thought more about what does that concept of a gas station look like if it's all electric. And what we're working on is a station that's just behind the Bright Line, which is the high-speed rail in Florida station right in the city of West Palm Beach. And there we've got solar canopies connected to battery storage. So we can take energy from the sun, collect it right there, store it on site in the battery, and then use that to sell electricity through the fast chargers that are integrated into the site. There's also a lot of, I would call aesthetics, experience, education, some awareness. So we've really tried to make it an all digital, very cool, forward-thinking take on what a station might look like in the future. And so not only is that serving a function, right, in a urban area, but we hope that it also inspires a lot of people by seeing that the transition to electric vehicles is cool, it's kind of trendy, it's very forward and convenient, right? If you live in that area, you've got 6 high-speed chargers that ain't going to go down even if the grid is down.
Yeah, that's awesome. This future graphic looks beautiful. I love the public art and green space that sort of corresponds to really, lean into that cool concept. Can you share any more about how are you going to encourage folks to charge at home, and where there'll be any special benefits for folks who do charge at home or off-peak?
The residential charging piece, as we've kind of evolved through, right? We started with public fast charging and the school buses. We branched a little bit out to talking to partners about fleets conversion. We're kind of now coming back to residential, right? As I mentioned before, a lot of charging, most charging is going to happen at home if you own a single family home. And so what does that look like, right? How can we as the utility enable it? Well, certainly today you can just plug in your car to your outlet on the wall, but that effectively level 1 charging could take you 20 hours. You could go and buy a level 2 charger and have that installed by a local electrician. There's no special payment plan. You're effectively paying the same rate of energy as your house is on, right? Which isn't necessarily a special EV rate. So, we've been thinking about it, and in our settlement agreement for a rate case, which is right now before the Public Service Commission, and we hope to be approved by the end of October, one idea that we teed up is a new tariff for us to be able to offer not only the installation of the equipment, right, whether it's a full install and you have nothing in your garage, or it's a partial install, we're putting the equipment on because you have the outlet, to have the equipment leased to you and then also put you on an EV time of use rate. And so when you do the math, as we've done in the proposed settlement, what that equates to is $38 roughly a month for unlimited nights and weekends charging, right? So that lines up with our time of use rate, but effectively $38. We've taken a look at the average miles driven in a year. We've done the math on vehicle efficiencies, and we feel like that's the right starting price point. Compare that to, I filled up my car the other day and it was over $70, right, for one fill. This is now $38 and it's unlimited nights and weekends. So every morning when you wake up, your car is fully charged, right? Because we're coming through the equipment we install, which is a level 2 charger on the wall. If you have a partial install, meaning if you already have the outlet on your wall in the garage, it's $32 a month. I think, and time will tell how successful this product will be, but I think this is one more convenient piece of the equation in converting drivers of internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, right? It's at your house, your car is full every day, it's a fixed number, it's a 10-year contract, it's very simple. we give you controls to monitor usage, and there are different ways. If you absolutely had to have a charge and leave early, you can do that. But I think when it comes down to a transition like we're looking at, I mean, there's 7 million cars in FPL's territory, and presumably someday, all of those cars will be, converted over. How do we make this cool? How can we help you save money? And how can we make it convenient, right? And so this is our best attempt, and we're going to learn a lot with this one, but our best attempt to kind of hit that right at the time that we believe a lot of compelling vehicles, electric vehicles, are going to be hitting the market in late 22 and early 23.
No, that's awesome. I would definitely sign up for that deal. Definitely far cheaper than I currently pay in gas for my ICE. Going back to the home charging, so curious about how you're identifying customers who own EVs and are charging at the home.
Yeah, that's a tough problem, I think, for us and for a lot of utilities. Just to give you a ballpark on what might be going on. So in Florida, we have big air conditioners because it's hot and humid for a lot of the year. So I think about a typical home somewhere between 5 and 7 kilowatts of peak load, right? Before you have an EV. So just think about that. You're cycling with AC. Our system peak on average is 4 p.m. and we typically look at August as our peak month. So just keep that in your mind. Now, let's say that same customer goes and buys an electric vehicle and they decide that they want to have a level 2 charger. They get it installed themselves, as a number of our customers have done. And now you've got an additional 7 kilowatts that are being demanded at the same time. In other words, in some cases, you more than doubled the household electrical demand at our peak hour. If you came home from work at 5 o'clock and you plugged in your car, right? So that may be okay for utilities when the numbers are small, but as the numbers start to grow, you are literally doubling the amount of energy being pushed into neighborhoods, right? And through the little green boxes in your front yard, if you're in single family homes. And so, eventually that becomes a problem. So probably like many other utilities, we're trying to figure out where those customers exist today. With our program, if you signed up for our residential program, we're going to know where you're at. We're going to plan accordingly, but those are starting to show up on the system. So, we've worked with Bidgley here on trying to do some preliminary work on identifying where those customers are. You're pulling out of 5 million, a base of 5 million residential customers, and maybe we've got 30 or 40,000 customers at this point with electric vehicles. So, and not all of them have a level 2 charge. If they're just plugging into the outlet on the wall, you won't see them. So I think that's a challenge, the diagnostic of figuring out where they're at. And then eventually you may determine, is there a way to convert that customer or come up with some incentive to move their charging, even if they're not on a utility-owned program, but to move their charging to off-peak hours. Because I think over time, that is an issue that all utilities are going to have to deal with.
Definitely. I'd agree with you there. I'm curious, of those who are engaged with you today, how frequently are they using the app? How many are using the app? And what's the, feedback you're getting from customers who are using the FPL app?
So it's interesting. We are, I will speak for, probably on behalf of all utilities. We do not have that DNA. We've had to build these muscles and these skills. A customer-facing app that is being used round the clock, and I'm not talking about. We have an app to pay your bill, and a way for you to report the outage. Now we're running payments through this. You're dealing with. There may be issues with bad debt. You may have stations that are out, and you're getting immediate feedback via Facebook of or other channels that your charging station is out. I think you've got to keep it current, right? This is not a one-off, you build it one time and you let it run. We have customers, with over 1,000 stations out there, somebody is charging at almost every moment at this point, and sometime soon it will be every moment of the day, and there'll be heavy demand periods. We've got to stay up on the development of the app and make sure that it's functioning and keeping pace with the industry, right, as others are advancing theirs. I mean, think about something as simple as, are you integrated in with CarPlay, right? A lot of our cars have CarPlay. If you're not, then you're driving around holding your phone, right? So, you've got to find ways to keep up. Most of the apps in the industry are doing that. So we've got to try to find, ways to keep up with that. But I would say we have gone very quickly from the phase of, we got the infrastructure out there, we got a mechanism for folks to pay and to kind of interact with it, to it now requires 24/7 support, and that is only going to grow. And I think we're just, it didn't take long to get there, but we've got the second or first, depending on how you count, largest network in our part of Florida. Our customers are counting on us. We're out there, and the early adopters, are taking note, and we've got to make sure, we approach it with the same philosophy on resiliency and being affordable that we do with, electricity sales through the traditional means.
Great. This has been fantastic, Matt. One final question to leave you here with, and it is, how is FPL going to leverage data analytics for your EV deployment and vision?
So I think data analytics is core to everything that we're going to be doing on EVs. As I've mentioned, this is happening kind of in real time, and these systems and processes have not been built. There's a wealth of information that is coming back, and we are only beginning to kind of tap what we're receiving. That's going to guide us in a number of things, right? The customer experience, how do we make it better? What are we learning? Are charging stations in the right spot? Is the price point the right price point? Are we having, different issues with reliability of these stations going down that we need to think about distribution planning any differently? And then kind of where is it going, right? I think the really interesting thing is nobody knows how this game is going to play out, right? You have all these interests that are jumping into the space, from oil companies, traditional retail gas stations. You've got money coming from car companies that are either partnering or deploying their own networks like Rivian and Tesla. You have utilities that are jumping in. You've got third-party players that are jumping in. You've got third-party apps that don't have hardware. They're just trying to help you navigate the world. There is a lot going on, and it's unclear right now kind of how this plays out. So I think our team is having a lot of fun, being in the game, trying to figure out how we support, and maybe some pieces we lead, and maybe other pieces we are purely supporting the other parties that are in the market. I think is yet to be told. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of that is going to be driven by the data that is coming in, and that's frankly why we did those initial pilots. We wanted to get charging stations out there, interact with real EV drivers, gather that data. As you mentioned before, trying to better detect what's going on at the home so that we could plan and support for that too. So I think it's underpinning much of what we're doing here.
Fantastic. Well, at Bidgley, we're excited to see what's next for FPL, and happy to have you today, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Appreciate it.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to our live engaged Q&A session. We're so happy to have you today. I'm going to start off with a question on the electric school bus fleets that FPL has been working to deploy. Can you share a bit about what makes them so unique and what you think will come next for fleet programs like that?
Yeah, Maria, it's good to be back with you and everybody else on this conference. I think you guys are doing a great job. A lot of interesting speakers and topics so far. So since we last talked, we've been busy with that school bus pilot. I was actually out with the mayor a couple of weeks ago at West Palm Beach. We did the commissioning, got to drive it around a little bit. It's got better acceleration than your average school bus. But the whole idea, and I talked a little bit about it before, behind that concept is really vehicle to grid. So we have no problem with the school bus charging, and I got a chance to talk to the bus driver about range and Does he have any anxiety taking it with kids on the highway to go to after-school events? His answer was no. He's feeling pretty good about it with the first bus that's arrived. But what we're really trying to troubleshoot right now and make sure we've got all the equipment synced up is that vehicle-to-grid capability. And I really think it's a blueprint for the future, as school buses are often parked right during the summer when we need energy, or in the evening, in the late afternoon when we had our typical summer peak. So we envision that not only being as a way for us to partner with the school districts and maybe offer some credit, right, to buy down effectively the cost of that bus, but potentially we've also given some thought to emergency shelters during hurricane events, and could you feed energy back in to power up a school that would be a shelter. So I think there's some technical proof cases out there, with V2G and getting that to work fluidly. But now we have everything in place. It's starting to talk to each other, and I think over the next 6 months we're really going to be kind of testing out different use cases and seeing how far we can take it.
That's awesome. I don't think I've ever wanted to drive a school bus more than right now. You really sold it. Also cool on the hurricanes. I mean, we see a need for that. And so I like that creativity and thinking about that type of storm support. So you also gave us your vision regarding what's likely to happen. But I'm curious about what you're worried about getting in the way of that plan. Where do you see an inflection point where electric vehicles will really take off?
Yeah, that's a good question, Maria. I think you're right. I'm a developer. I tend to focus on the positive, and this is where we're going. And I think we all believe this is an inevitable transition. But, if you just zero in on today, why don't most of you own an electric vehicle? Well, maybe you got an order down on a Rivian or a Ford F-150 Lightning, but it ain't going to be here until 2023 or 4. Honestly, and today, if you put it in, it may be that long of a wait, right? I mean, chip shortage, COVID aside, I think these are brand new platforms and vehicles. And remember, unlike renewables, if you got a renewable portfolio standard out there, you can effectively nudge the utility or the end user to change their usage. We have to have compelling cars for people to buy, and the cars have to be available, right? And so I get it. It's easy for the utility guy. It's on the car companies, but they have to make that sale first. Then, and very quickly then, I think we have to be ready to supply the energy. In the case that I've talked about, we're doing some charging infrastructure. We have to be ready for that. And I think what's in the back of my mind, our team's mind right now, is we know it's coming. We think it's soon. We're not entirely sure. Is it next year? Is it 2024? But at some point, it'll be here. And our job is to get ready for that, right? And so what you may see is infrastructure, and I don't think this is necessarily a problem, getting a little bit ahead of where the cars on the road are. For a variety of reasons, right? And like today, for example, we were just looking at our utilization data for our chargers, and it's kind of low. But if you're deploying chargers that are not Tesla, because 80% of the cars in Florida roughly are electric vehicles, that is, are Teslas, we're catering to that other 20% of the market. That is the Chevy Bolts, the Nissan Leafs. It's not growing yet, right? So we're positioning for that market to really take off. But again, the cars have to be there, and it's got to be compelling enough for you to make, take that leap and make your next purchase with an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I frankly think that's really a smart approach, because if things go the way we all hope and think they will, that's going to be necessary. And if you don't do that right now, you're going to be in a world of hurt then. So I like how FP&L is structuring, your infrastructure building as well as these development cases. Someone from the audience actually asked something which sort of goes along with this around your mobile charging stations. So I find that interesting because that sort of enables you to be flexible. So can you talk about, with that mobile charging station, what's the model? Like, what's the ownership model? How will you determine where it goes and for how long it will go? could that be rented, or would that always be basically owned and operated by FPL?
Well, whoever asked the question, that's a lot of good ideas. I mean, we want to create it, right? I think Tesla's got a version of it. They've tried out once, and I'm not sure I've seen anyone else do it. So first step is like, let's make this thing work. And then, as a pilot, we can try out all those use cases. I don't know what's going to be the most compelling. I mean, when you think about practically, what does that offer? You're moving something that's quite heavy down the road. You have to obviously charge it in advance. You got to figure out where to position it. But when you position it, you got to let people know where it's at. And then once people know where it's at, you've got to, you can only charge so many cars. So I think ours would charge, I'm going to guess, between 25 and 50, like Tesla Model 3s. So that's putting a dent, right, in it. But if you had a hurricane evacuation, you're going to need lots of trailers, and you're going to need to be circling back and forth. I think there's other less stressful models, which are, you have an outage in a local outage, utility has an outage in the area, and we can move a vehicle in there for anybody in the neighborhood, for example, that would need to charge their vehicle. That 25 to 50 charges full up, that makes a little more sense. And then look, I know it's not green, but we've also thought about, particularly for the utilities fleet, where it's got to run for those major restoration efforts. If we shift our fleet to electric, we may need diesel generators on back of trucks so we can power up our vehicles such that they can restore the electric grid, right? So it may be a multi-fuel thing too, because remember, you're using those usually when the grid is out. Now, the one other use case you mentioned, you could rent it, or if we saw a lot of demand during rush hour and it's going to take me 6 months to get more chargers into Miami, maybe we position it there every afternoon and you can augment your existing site. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can go with it. The good news is in March, I think we're going to take delivery of that. And then, like I was talking about with the school bus, we have a lot of experimentation to do in 2022 here.
That's awesome. I think we'll all be interested in hearing about the results next year because you're doing all of these cool projects. One final question for you, Matt. It's about the vendor ecosystem. So what do you think the vendor ecosystem looks like with respect to your EV goals being realized at FPL, as well as EV goals being realized statewide and nationally?
Gosh, I mean, there's lots I could say, and I know we're short on time. I mean, look, I think take GM's announcement, right? So there's lots of companies innovating in this space. You got the big car companies, the oil companies are jumping in, retail gas, if they're separate, are jumping in, utilities are part of it, separate companies are doing charging infrastructure. You've got startups like, we're partnering with Nuvve, for example, on the vehicle to grid, and you have others that are bringing data and insights. Then you've got, so those are the players, right? And you've got different technology and standards that are still sorting themselves out. But then you've got the car companies thinking about how far into this ecosystem they want to go. And GM just had an announcement yesterday, I think, where they're talking about, I mean, there's some elements which are like Tesla, but how much further do they go in, and do they offer chargers with their vehicles? Do they offer services with the vehicles? It is a really, I mean, if you're a business school student looking at this case study being written, it's kind of fascinating because nobody knows how it's going to play out, right? And I think the good news is there's, I know Florida's numbers are 17 million cars here. There's a lot of room and space for I think all of us to coexist. And that's kind of our perspective in the next several years, which is, we need everybody's support to get this done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. This has been a pleasure and happy to have you. Hopefully we have you next year as well.